Is everything okay?
I think so. Join a meeting. Okay. No, it's going to do this stuff. Let me try again.
Hello.
Hello.
This is so
I'm
nice
Devi.
hearing of.
I'm Devi. Welcome.
Devi.
Welcome to Trisakti
Thank you.
University.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. We are very happy because you have time.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
I thought Phil Collins.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that a lot. He's the singer. He's got a better voice than me.
Yeah, in my era.
Yeah, my ear too. Yeah.
Because I asked the student, they don't know Phil
Uh-huh.
Collins.
All right.
Thank you very much.
No, it's my ear too. Okay, thank you. Very pleased to come. I was in trouble. I don't know. So it's asking me for password. It's asking me for password. I put in the. I wonder if it wants my password.
Okay.
I put in this password, but that doesn't work. That didn't work at least for this thing. I wonder if it wants this one. No, it doesn't like that either. Let me try what to do. I'm not sure what to do. I'll try one more time. I don't know, it no longer clicks when I do this. Let me try this. Open and open the tab. Hold on. One more time. Click loud. So, I mean, have you had to authorize? It says, what it says. This meeting is for authorized persons only. Click sign in to join with an email address authorized for joining this meeting. Right?
Okay. It's actually already you can end join the Zoom without any authentication.
Okay, so I'll do okay. Let's see if that works. Let's try this again. I'll try this. Meeting ID. Yes. What is this? Yeah, it's still asking for a password.
So I think this is your email and the password for your Zoom.
Oh, for my Zoom. I don't have a password.
Okay.
Zoom. I don't think.
Or you can just share the.
I could try using the ANU Zoom portal. I have an account on that, so I'll try that. ANU Zoom. I don't know how that'll work. Let's see. Yeah.
Iya si Wakil nggak bisa masuk ke Zoom karena nggak punya akun Zoom. Kan bisa pakai akun.
Okay, join me.
Hapus.
Join me. Enter meeting ID. Join. Oh, wow. Yeah, it does have trouble. It's trying to install updates and it can't do it for some reason. I don't know why. Okay, Pascal. That's looking better. Does not belong. Are you sure you want to join? Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Can I share my screen? Oh, but I can't share screen. It says you cannot share screen. This will stop other. Do you want to? Yeah, okay, that looks good. So I'll wait until I'm introduced and then I'll share the screen. Should I share screen now or should I?
The operator will show the screen first, then after the session are given to Mr. Ramadan and we can start the session.
Okay, that's fine. Yep.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our event today about black swans and seismic risk in the city of Southeast Asia. Before I open this event, let me introduce myself. My name is Rizky Koki Mahendra. I am a student here in Universitas Trisakti. Before we begin our event, let us open this event with our song, Indonesia Raya. Ladies and gentlemen, may you please sit up. Thank you. May you please be seated back. For the next session, we will have welcoming speech from our head of department, Dr. Suherman Dwi Nurayana, STMT.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Honorable Professor Bill Cummins from Australian National University and Geoscience in America. Honorable Vice Dean of Ibu Dewi Sabriti of FTKI, and especially my college lectures from Geology Department and my student. I would like to happy we have all to together in here room. This event is one of the program, our program of Geology Department. I think is program is interesting program because the one of the program of Geology Department is collaborated with French University, invite for speaker from another university. Thank you for Prof. Welcome to the Universitas Trisakti. Thank you for coming here to share a session about black swan and megacities. Seismic risk. Seismic risk is Southeast Asia. This is interesting topic because Jakarta is one of the city in the Southeast Asia too. Because the Jakarta is one of the risk of the disaster too, over earthquake. I think we can learn more about this topic from the expert. I think I have to. That's all for me to speak. I hope everyone can learn more about topic about seismic risk because interesting. Would like to thank you to committee in prepare for this session. Once again, Professor Pilkuman, thank you very much. Welcome Jakarta. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Suherman. Next, we will go into the next session, the main session. Before that, let me introduce our moderator for today's event is Mr. Ramadan Aditama, STMSC. And Also, you will be hearing a presentation from Professor Phil Cummins about black swans and seismic risk of Southeast Asia. For this session, I will leave it to Mr. Ramadan.
Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, student and everyone. Very good day today. A little bit showering with rains, but still in good mood, yeah? Okay. So I'm honored to be your moderator for today, for this today's science talk on earthquakes. As we all know, earthquakes are one of the most fascinating and destructive natural phenomena that we encounter on our planet. The science behind earthquake is complex and ever evolving. And today we have the privilege of hearing from an expert in the field. Our guest speaker for today, Professor Phil Cummins. Thank you very much for coming to Trisakti University. And he's a renowned earthquake scientist who has devoted his career to studying earthquakes and understanding their impact on our planet. He was conducting extensive research on earthquake slip distribution, amplification of seismic waves within the sedimentary basin, especially in Indonesia, isn't it? Am I right? Yeah, okay. And earthquake mitigation strategies. In the next couple hours, Professor Phil Cummins will take us through the probably latest development and paradigm about this natural phenomena and earthquake science. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Cummins, who will be taking us on a fascinating journey through the world of earthquake. Please give him a warm welcome. Time is yours, Professor.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to give the talk. It's a real pleasure to be able to come here today. It was a little bit quick, so forgive me if the presentation isn't quite that polished. Let me see. I'm trying to figure out which one I think is this one. Let's try this one. Allow Zoom. Okay, bear with me. I have to let Zoom open.
Take your time, Phil.
Zoom may not be able to record that. All right, let's see. Okay, I'm going to try again. Oh, that looks dirty. That's the one, actually. Yes, okay, there you go. So that's on the screen, great, okay. So this is a presentation I gave, I actually gave it at ITB a long time ago, and I've modified it a bit for today's presentation. I've updated it somewhat. It's on black swans and seismic risk in the megacities of Southeast Asia. Black swans are things that surprise us. You know, they were the Europeans who came to Australia were very surprised when they were used to white swans, and they saw in Australia black swans. So they were very surprised. And so now this is used as a thing that is very surprising, an occurrence that's very surprising. My name is Phil Cummins. I'm from the Research School of Earth Sciences at the Australian National University. I also work for Geoscience Australia and hold an honorary professorship at Bandung Institute of Technology. So I prepared this during COVID, and we're all still pretty familiar with COVID, I think. And I was really struck by the fact that there was this quote from someone about COVID, that future pandemics are likely to happen more frequently, have greater economic impact, and kill more people if we are not very careful about the possible impacts of choices we make today. And I was struck by that because you can say exactly the same thing about earthquakes. We could equally warn that earthquake disasters are going to be more frequent and have higher impact unless we are very careful about the choices we make today. So that's really one of the main points that I want to emphasize in this talk, that we can reduce earthquake impacts if we make the right choices. And I wanted to start off with this spectacular video of, let's see, oh, good, okay. The spectacular video of a pool at the top of a apartment building, very tall apartment building in the Philippines. This was happened at the time of a magnitude 6.1 earthquake, about 80 kilometers from Manila, and the earthquake only caused light shaking. It didn't really cause much damage in Manila, but remarkably, this pool started sloshing around and poured out most of its water onto the people below. No one was actually hurt, but they were quite frightened, as you can see, and it was quite a spectacular event. And it's an example of matched resonance. So what's happening is that the earthquakes are shaking the ground at a certain period, and the hotel or the apartment building is built on a basin frequency. And that pool, the water in that building also has its own resonant frequency. And the water in the pool has its own frequencies matched. You can get phenomena, very surprising phenomena like this happening, things that you didn't expect. And so, you know, this could have been avoided. This hasn't happened. Earthquakes of that size haven't caused any problems in Manila before. This happened because they chose to build a building like this in that particular place with those particular resonance characteristics. And because of that choice, we're seeing this. Fortunately, it's not a deadly impact, but it is quite a surprising one. And so I'll refer to this later, this idea of match resonance, but this was a fairly spectacular one. Unfortunately, didn't kill many people, but other resonances can, as we'll see. Now, I wanted to, this is talk about risk, and I wanted I wanted us all to understand what risk is and what some of the terms we use. The hazard, risk is a combination of hazard, exposure, and fragility and vulnerability. And so the hazard is the physical phenomenon itself, the earthquake shaking. Earthquakes cause the ground to shake. That's a hazard, potentially. Now, it's only a problem, though, if we have things that we value where the ground is shaking. Right? If an earthquake occurs, and earthquakes do occur, very large earthquakes occur on very remote places like the Kuril Islands or Kamchatka, and they don't really affect that many people. So it's not such a problem. But when earthquakes happen where there are a lot of people, and we would say where there's a lot of exposure, that can lead to a disaster. Now, that will only lead to a disaster, actually, if those people are vulnerable to the hazard phenomenon. In the case of earthquakes, the hazard is ground shaking. The fragility is of buildings. If buildings are fragile and cannot withstand strong ground shaking, they will collapse and people will die. So all of those things are important. You have to understand the hazard. What's the potential for ground shaking? How many buildings do you have in the area that might experience ground shaking? And how vulnerable are those things? All three factors lead to risk. And so if all of those are high, then your risk is very high. Now, exposure is certainly a problem throughout Southeast Asia, and that's illustrated in this figure that shows the rise of megacities in Southeast Asia. You can see from 1975, you can see the legend there. The small red dots are cities of what, 1 to 5 million people. And then the orange dots are 5 to 10, and the big red dots are 10 million plus. And you can see going from 1975 to 2009 to 2025, the explosion in the number of megacities, cities with 10 million or more people. And you should know this in Indonesia very well because you have several megacities, at least if you count the greater metropolitan area of the city. That there you have several megacities that exceed 10 million in population, but it's true throughout Southeast Asia, as this slide shows, especially in China and India, you have very large megacities as well as the Philippines. Oh, I'm sorry. And why is that a problem? Well, the exposure is much greater. And it's actually a greater problem now because you've got many people in a small footprint. So you've got many people crowded together. And if an earthquake happens, even a moderate earthquake happens in that small footprint, you potentially have a big problem, a big impact of that event. The factors that contribute to vulnerability, due to these urban areas are one, construction standards are often poor. They've been rapidly constructed. If it's in developing countries, the material can be poor, and the standards, the use of materials cannot be adequate. So that's one problem. Also, people in cities depend on critical lifelines. They're much more dependent on critical lifelines: water, sanitation, and power. If someone in a village in the country has their house knocked down by an earthquake, they have food in the fields, hopefully. They have water in the stream. You know, they can get the basic things they need to live. But if someone in the city loses those, they depend on lifelines to supply those kind of things, and the earthquake can threaten those lifelines. And then also there's actually less social cohesion, or tends to be less social cohesion in urban areas. You know, and again, if you're in the village and your house gets knocked down, you go stay with your brother's house, so your father's house, or a friend's house. But in the city, it's more likely that you might not have anyone that you can rely on, and so there's just less social cohesion, less ability for people to help each other. The networks, the social networks, tend to be less tight than they are in the countryside, and so this will affect not only people in Jakarta, people some of us are from Jakarta, but many of us would have moved to Jakarta, and you might not have such a great network of people, friends, and relatives you can rely on. That's true in many megacities in Southeast Asia. Now, the earthquakes themselves, I wanted to talk about them because we've all heard about the big earthquakes, the ones in Sumatra. The ones on the left-hand side are I think they're the 10 biggest earthquakes in the last, well, since earthquakes recording was done. And you can see that they're basically of magnitude 8.6 and above. 2 Sumatra earthquakes feature there prominently, which we all know: the 2004 Sumatra earthquake and the 2005, the 2005 Nias earthquake. The other ones are in Japan and Alaska and elsewhere. Some of these are really big. Chile, 9.5, the largest earthquake ever recorded. But if you look at the fatalities column, you can see that sometimes these don't kill, these kill virtually nobody. As I mentioned, if they happen in very remote areas, they might not affect anyone. And sometimes they're pretty high, like the 2004 Sumatra and Andaman earthquake. That happens in this case because almost all of these are megathrust earthquakes. In fact, all of them are megathrust earthquakes. So they've happened offshore, and that means they're typically 200 kilometers away from a population center. So they won't actually kill that many people through ground shaking. In many cases, they kill very few people. Even if a very large earthquake happens 200 kilometers offshore, they might not affect that many buildings onshore. But what they can do is cause big tsunamis. And so that's what we saw in Aceh, and also in 2011 in Japan, where an earthquake generated a tsunami directly offshore major urban centers. And then it did cause a lot of fatalities, but only then did those earthquakes cause many fatalities. On the other hand, you look at these earthquakes on the right-hand side, and they were chosen because they were high fatality events. I could actually add the Turkey earthquake to that. These were very high fatality events. And you can see the Java, 2006 Java, the Jakarta earthquake ranks in there, as well as the Kobe earthquake and other earthquakes. All of them have very high numbers of fatalities. In particular, the Haiti earthquake, over 300,000, more than was killed by the Aceh tsunami, we think, were killed in the 2010 Haiti earthquake. Now, if you look at the magnitude column, though, these are much lower magnitudes in the left-hand column. These are relatively moderate earthquakes. 6.3 Jakarta, 6.9 Kobe. Haiti was a 7. So they're not nearly as big because, you know, magnitude is a logarithmic scale. So 1 unit of magnitude is 10 times large, corresponds to a 10 times larger earthquake. Is there a problem? So these are much smaller earthquakes, and yet they killed many more people. And they did that because they ruptured in major urban centers. These earthquakes were all onshore, and most of them ruptured right in a city. Haiti ruptured right into the capital of the country. Kobe did the same, and right in the 6th Java earthquake ruptured right in Jakarta, or very close to Jakarta. So these all ruptured in major urban centers. So they don't have to be that big to cause many fatalities, because they're in these areas, they occur in these areas where there are many people concentrated close together, so they can cause big impacts. This happens throughout the world. We just saw this. In fact, I think I first gave this talk not long after, maybe 2019, just after the Sulawesi earthquake. So this was an example. Palu isn't such a huge Indonesian city by Indonesian standards, but it is a fairly big city. And all of these people are right on top of the Palu Coral Fault. They're all settled in a basin, a sedimentary basin in the Palu Valley, right on top of the Palu Coral Fault. And we all saw what happened in 2018, that it killed several thousand people. An earthquake of magnitude 7.5 occurred in September of 2018, ruptured right into the city of Palu. You can see, does my pointer show up there? Let me just turn the pointer on. You can see the pointer? Anyway, you all probably know where the Palu Coral Fault is. It runs right through here. The earthquake actually started here and joined the Palu Coral Fault here and then ruptured right through the city. So it caused this did cause major building collapse through ground shaking. But yeah, that's where the earthquake occurred. But the other thing it did, as we all know, it triggered these low angle landslides, which was a huge surprise. This was another black swan thing, that the earthquake, this was, I would say most people did not expect this to happen, and it caused several areas in Palu to fail, even though they were relatively low slope. They weren't very steep areas, but they had these massive landslides, and that actually killed many people. I mean, sure, it caused the buildings to collapse, but those buildings collapsed because they were in this huge landslide and it really caused a major loss of life. Most of these slopes were quite low, less than 2 degrees, in fact. So that's why it was a real surprise. And the thinking is that this was caused by the rise in the water table due to irrigation in the Palu Valley. So again, it was a choice people made. People chose to live in the Palu Valley. They chose to irrigate crops because Palu was affected by famine, as I understand it, prior to the 20th century. So this seemed like a really good idea to have an irrigation channel that would help them grow crops. But what they didn't anticipate was that they were raising the water table. And what this does is cause the soil to lose cohesion. If granular soil that's saturated with water is subject to strong shaking, it will lose its cohesion and it just behaves like a fluid. It's just, during that time of shaking, it just turns into a fluid and will just flow downhill, even if the slope is only 2 degrees, as it did in Palu. And the displacement, the maximum run out of these landslides was, over 1 kilometer. So it was extraordinary large landslides, even though there was very slow slopes. And it was caused by raising the water table, which then resulted in what's called liquefaction when the earthquake occurred. So again, this was a major disaster, largely unforeseen. We knew earthquakes would happen there, but we didn't know this liquefaction would happen. And it was caused by the choices people made without really thinking about the consequences. Now, there are other events, earthquakes themselves, that were big surprises. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami was a big surprise to most seismologists. They didn't expect that earthquakes that large could happen off Sumatra, as was the Japan earthquake. It was thought at the time that the maximum earthquake you would get off northeast Japan was about a magnitude 8. But this was, as we all know, it was a magnitude 9 occurred, and that is capable of causing a much larger tsunami than a magnitude 8. So could this happen elsewhere? And we could ask the question, how likely is a 1 million fatality earthquake in Asia sometime in the 21st century? Given that there is this propensity for large earthquakes to occur in many of the places where we have high populations, and the fact that the population has exploded in these mega cities where there's often poor standards of construction, is it inevitable that we're going to see a 1 million fatality earthquake in the 21st century? It's something that we need to ask ourselves. Certainly there are many places where it could happen. There was in 1762, there was an earthquake off the Myanmar coast that caused extensive destruction along that coast and into the Chittagong area in Bangladesh. That could have caused a tsunami to happen in that area, right at the northern tip of Bay of Bengal. Seen that in both in offshore marine terraces, offshore, we've seen the effects of that earthquake in offshore marine terraces here, as well as, interestingly, in a study of kilns that have been unearthed during really low tides. The very low tides, extremely low tides, expose archaeological kilns where they fired pottery, and these have been dated now, and it's been seen that there was a subsidence, major subsidence that occurred up in that northern tip of the Bay of Bengal right at the time of that earthquake. So there clearly was a major earthquake that affected that area in 1762. It may have caused a large tsunami, but in any case, the earthquake would devastated the area on the Myanmar coast and around Chittagong. Sorry, Chittagong is over here. And so, but which was not that big a city at the time. So now it's a major city. Furthermore, as you go further north along the same plate boundary, you get into the, you come near the city of Dhaka, which is a major megacity of Southeast Asia, 21 million people in the greater Dhaka area. It doubles every 15 years, making it the world's fastest growing major urban center. Construction can be very poor, and in fact, it can be so poor that buildings can collapse spontaneously. This figure here is of a building that it didn't need an earthquake, it just fell down without an earthquake. So you can imagine if there is a major earthquake or even a moderate earthquake, what would happen to buildings in Dhaka? This has also been shown in a paper, in a study by Steckler et al., that the strain, there's the accumulation of strain. This is where the Indian plate is, it's mainly moving north with respect to Myanmar. So it's mainly sort of a strike slip regime, but there is a little bit of convergence between the Indian plate and the Burma microplate. The ground is sort of, it's rising up and building up in anticipation of a new earthquake. And this is a huge area over which the strain is accumulating. It could be equivalent to a magnitude 8 to 9 earthquake. And it's estimated that there are 150 million people within 100 kilometers of this source zone. And many of them are in urban areas where the quality of construction is poor. So definitely potential for major earthquake disaster in that area, in the Dhaka area. And then Manila in the Philippines, similarly, well, I guess it's a little bit different in that this is along the Philippines fault system. This is the Philippines, and this is the Philippine fault system. And there's a spur of this fault system that cuts right through Manila, another megacity in Southeast Asia. This is called the West Valley Fault, which cuts through right through Manila. And it has been studied. Sorry. First, I'll mention Manila's population growth, that it grew by a factor of 10 between 1950 and 2020, so that it used to be, let's see, it grew from 14 million, wait a minute, I have to read it, from 1.5 to 14 million between 1950 and 2020. And if you go to the greater area, Greater Manila has an even bigger population of 24 million. So it's expanded very rapidly, as have many other cities in West Asia. And if this West Valley Fault ruptured, indeed, it could cause a major disaster in Manila. Geoscience Australia did a study of this. There is geological work on that fault that shows that it's experienced a few ruptures in the last 1,400 years. Never experienced a recorded, no, it has experienced one recorded earthquake that was a magnitude 2.7. So we talked about this with the normal fault in the Banda Sea. One tiny earthquake has been recorded on this fault, but they know from geologic studies, which they dig a trench and they look for evidence of the earthquake, and they've seen that it has experienced rupture of earthquakes of about magnitude 7 that occur every 500 years or so. So they know that a big earthquake can happen on this fault. And we did a study of the potential risk in Quezon City and found that this could cause, which is a suburb, it's just a small district in Manila. And we estimated that such an earthquake could cause over 5,000 fatalities in Quezon City alone. So if you then took that study and expanded it to Greater Manila, it would actually be many more. It would probably be similar to the Turkey earthquake, if not even greater in terms of its impact. And then finally, I'm going to spend the rest of the talk on Indonesia now. I want to come to Jakarta. we all know we're there now, so we know Jakarta has a very large population, 10 million people within the city limits, but over 30 million in the greater Jakarta area, Jabodetabek, which is one of the, this place, Allianz has ranked it as the world's second, that whole greater Jakarta as the world's second largest megacity. So it really ranks among the largest megacities in the world. It's 300 kilometers from the Java Trench megathrust, where the Australian plate dives beneath the Sydney plate, and it has a convergence rate of about 6 millimeters a year. And what that means is that over 100 years, there's potentially a slip deficit occurring on that megathrust of about 6 meters. So the longer you wait, after 200 years, it could be 12 meters, 300 could be 18 meters. So you've got potentially, at least we don't know for sure, but potentially it could be accumulating energy that's building up to a large earthquake of magnitude 8 or even 9. It's also close to several large and possibly active faults and lies above a very active Benialp zone. So you've seen that in the Tasikmalaya earthquake of 2009, and you probably felt, some people in Jakarta, I think that was widely felt in Jakarta, and I think people in Jakarta have felt other deep earthquakes. These are deep earthquakes, so they can also be very damaging. But let's talk a bit more about that, because Jakarta, like many other cities in Indonesia and Southeast Asia and the world, is built on a sedimentary basin. So it's built on a basin of soft sediments, and that is a problem with earthquakes because when the waves enter the soft sediment, the amplitude of the waves gets larger just due to conservation of energy. It takes more energy to move a hard rock a little bit than it takes to move sediment by a lot. So basically, when the waves enter the sediment, they'll cause much more displacement. And also these basins will trap energy. The waves will start bouncing around within this sedimentary basin, and the energy gets trapped there. So it builds up. The waves will constructively interfere, and they will, as is indicated here, that you get some of the waves constructively interfere as they bounce back and forth. Some of the waves destructively interfere, and you get nothing. But some of them will add together, and you'll get a much larger wave that will build up over time. And that will have a particular frequency, particular resonant frequency. And we see this in many cities throughout the world. Saw this in Mexico City, 2017. If you watch that building, which building? That one right there. It's very difficult to see, but if you look at the tree in front and you look at the curtains, they're sort of swaying back and forth with about 1 second period, which is the resonant period of the Mexico City sedimentary basin, and as it turns out, the resonant period of that building. And you'll see what happens in just a second, that a complete collapse of that building due to the fact that the building's resonant frequency matches the resonant frequency of the basin. And I was excited by the frequency content of this particular earthquake. 5 minutes remaining. Oh, okay. Let me see then. So I won't talk much more about that, but I will talk about Jakarta. We can look at Jakarta. We've done studies in Jakarta to look at the resonant periods of the basin. We find that this is a sort of spectrum that shows the resonant periods of the basin. And we see that there's a very long period resonant peak, low frequency resonant peak, which might affect high-rise buildings, and a much shorter period resonant frequency of 2 hertz that might affect residential construction. And so both of these are a problem. High buildings are generally built to a relatively high standard, but if they resonate, we could have problems, as we've seen in Turkey recently. And then of course, the low-rise buildings are often not built to high standards. So even if they're not at the resonant frequency, they could have problems. I want to point out very quick, when it comes to building height, if you compare the height of building Jakarta with the height of buildings in other seismically active areas of the world, Jakarta really has high buildings. You've got 100, I think, construction, I don't know, 100-story building in Jakarta was approved a few years ago. Well, you have many buildings above 50 stories. compared to other cities, even, like in Japan and Mexico City, certainly. So you've got really high buildings, and you're about 300 kilometers away from a subduction zone where you'll get large earthquakes that excite very long period seismic waves. And you can see this, it's possible to deal with this if the construction is correct. This shows the effects of base isolation. You can see on the left, it's an experiment showing one building that's rigidly attached to this shaking table. And you can see the one on the left really vibrates strongly. The other one is isolated. It's got these isolators that are built in to sort of isolate the building from the ground vibration, and it rides it out fairly smoothly. And you can see this actually in actual buildings in the 2011 Japan earthquake, that you can see those buildings just gently swaying back and forth because buildings that size in Japan are base isolated. My understanding is that only one building in Jakarta is base isolated, so they're not really built. I would say I'm not an engineer, but I would say that they're not really built to withstand the kind of earthquakes we might expect near a subduction zone. And really, you might say, well, why aren't other people worried about tall buildings? Why would it just be Jakarta that should worry about their tall buildings? Well, it's not. San Francisco is also very worried, actually. And I don't think their building profile even is as Jakarta's, but they're worried about their buildings, that they've simply built too high, given that they're in an area that will experience very large earthquakes. I'll just show this for the moment, that we all saw what happened in Turkey when there was a very large earthquake that occurred there in southeast Turkey, and saw many examples of major building collapse due to poor construction standards. Turkey does have fairly high, it has a building code and tries to maintain a high standard of construction, but there's a lot of corruption, so they really have a problem enforcing those standards. Now, I want to back up a little bit and talk a bit about, well, how do we know that we're going to get these big earthquakes in Jakarta or Java in particular? Well, because we haven't experienced them. Most people that I talk to in Jakarta, they haven't experienced earthquakes. Their parents or grandparents haven't experienced big earthquakes. They don't think they happen in Java or, well, other than Jakarta. But that's not true if you look in the historical record. If you look back in the archives during the colonial period, there are many examples of historical earthquakes. My student, Stacy Martin, has recently published a paper on this. He's assembled over 7,000 macroseismic observations where he reads historical accounts and tries to work out how intense the shaking was for 1,200 historical earthquakes, and has found that throughout Indonesia, of course, there are many large earthquakes that have happened, but in Java in particular, there have been some very large earthquakes, much larger than we've experienced in the recorded during the time that we've recorded earthquakes. I think I'll skip this because I'm running out of time. And we all know what residential construction is like in Java. It's not the best. I go around, I travel around Java and elsewhere in Indonesia, and people do what they can, but oftentimes there might be little reinforcement. There are typically masonry buildings. Large fraction are masonry buildings, which does not stand up well in earthquakes, and many of them are not reinforced. Masonry buildings can be okay if they're reinforced. Many are not, or have very poor reinforcement. An example would be the Lombok earthquakes. I'll just skip through this and talk about how you can see this going to the areas of earthquake damage in Lombok, that there are places you can see these reinforcement that's sticking out of these collapsed buildings, and that shouldn't happen. If a building is constructed using high quality concrete, the concrete doesn't separate from the steel. The whole point of reinforcement is that the reinforced concrete and the steel deforms as a unit, so that the concrete, where it's weak, the steel is strong, and they can sort of reinforce each other in a complementary way. So, for example, this is a building that that fell over in a large earthquake in Los Angeles, and you can see much different type of failure. It did collapse because it experienced very strong ground motion, but the concrete and steel stay together. And in fact, it didn't collapse in a way that would necessarily kill all the people in that building. That's actually a parking garage, and most people probably could have gotten out, even though the building itself was completely destroyed. I guess I won't go through a lot more of this, but the other thing we need to understand is fragility. We've done some work in the Philippines to understand and quantify the fragility of buildings. This was during the Bohol earthquake done by my student Muriel Naguit. There was a large earthquake. This is a small island in the Philippines. And she did a survey of all the damage that occurred on that island in Bohol and was able to sort of figure out which buildings totally collapsed. You can see the x-axis here is the intensity of shaking, the Mercalli intensity, and the y-axis is the fraction of buildings that were in a particular damaged state. So the red is collapsed. So for really high intensities, some of the buildings completely collapsed. More of them were subject to high level of damage, and then even more had sort of moderate level of damage and more weren't damaged at all. So you need that kind of quantification of the building fragility if you want to predict what might happen if one of those historical events in Java were to recur today. And one of my other students, Ricky Weber, I guess I won't go into the details on this either. She's building up an exposure database to try to figure out how many buildings we have and where they're located in Java. So you can see the location of masonry houses on the upper left there and the non-masonry houses on the upper right. I was interested, I didn't realize there are actually quite a few wood buildings in the northern part of Eastern Java. A lot of wood construction there, but elsewhere it's mostly masonry. So she's trying to put together that at the DESA level. So she sort of knows how many of those types of buildings are in the DESA. So we can put that into the, combine that with the fragility models and our understanding of earthquake shaking to try to forecast what might happen if large earthquakes happen in Java, in particular the large earthquakes that we know already happened during the historical colonial period. And I wanted to point out that one thing we can do now, the Chianjur earthquake, as tragic as it was with over 300 fatalities and 10,000 homes destroyed, it's actually a good opportunity for us to calibrate our models so that we can try to understand what might happen if an even larger earthquake happened. Because Chianjur, as we all know, wasn't really that big. It just, again, it was a moderate earthquake that happened to occur right in an urban center. It wasn't that large a city, but it was an urban center. And so that's why it caused so much damage and fatalities. But if we want to predict this, we need to develop these exposure and fragility models as well as the earthquake hazard information. And then we need to calibrate it with actual data, which we hope the Chianjur earthquake will give us an opportunity to do. And now on my last slide. So these are my conclusions. Regardless of how likely a massive fatality earthquake in Southeast Asia is, we should recognize the possibility that such an event can occur. We really can get major events even in some of these, well, especially in some of these high density population areas. How should we prepare? In the short term, we need better disaster response planning. Disaster response agencies need to know how to respond, and they need to know what they might need to respond to and just how bad some of these events could be. In the long term, we need better building practice. I think many people in Java realize this with the Chianjur earthquake, but we really have to be aware that this is going to happen again unless we make the right choices to build better buildings. We need also more earthquake research. Something like that. And sorry. And then the last one, yeah, that's right. And then can we realistically prevent lock-in of fragile building stock? Because if we allow fragile buildings to be constructed now, we're locking in that vulnerability for a later earthquake. And can we really prevent that? I don't know. The difficulty here in Indonesia is enforcement of the building codes, getting people to actually follow the building codes. It's not that people are stupid, they just can't afford sometimes the construction materials, the paying for engineers is very difficult to do. There might be simpler things we can do, just having standard minimum level strength of concrete and reinforcement detailing. And we need to check that those are actually followed if whatever we do. So I'll stop there. Sorry for running over.
Thank you very much for your comments, Professor, for the comments. So make a round of applause, people. I mean, it's unfortunate because the time is only 40 minutes, but time flies. It's like it's different from regular class, isn't it, students? I mean, if in regular class, like 40 minutes is like eternity. But then, like for your lecture now, 40 minutes is less like a fraction of seconds. But it's very interesting. I mean, yeah, unfortunately, we want to know more about this earthquake science and about this the details. So I think we going to enter the discussion sessions for now. Yeah. So we actually have quite plenty of time because I think the schedule is like 20 minutes, so we still have 15 minutes. So I'm going to give the audience for opportunity for ask a question, probably online also. Yeah. So please. So first from the audience in this room, probably. Anyone? Okay, so it's mine. Okay. For the black swan, the unpredictable, and if we look at the events, I mean the earthquake events that happened just recently, or maybe in the very near couple years ago, we have this like a Mamuju earthquake and then Cianjur earthquake, when black swans event. I mean, no one predict that event. No one, even in Cianjur, the fault is not really well mapped. So I think what is your opinion, and how this is the, I don't know, maybe small steps for our university or geology in Indonesia as a general, how we tackle or map effectively about this and to tackle this black swans event happen again. So what is your solution for this problem?
Well, I think geologists do some of the most important work that we can do in this situation, and that is to identify and characterize active faults and their ability to generate earthquakes. But that takes a long time. My experience with that is it takes a long time. And it's very difficult to do in Java for many reasons. There's a high erosion rate, and there's lots of cultural activity that will just wipe out the expression. You know, earthquakes always leave a record. They typically leave a record in the geology. Some you know, a fault scarp, for example, or just soil layers that have been displaced. But these often get, you know, reworked by farming and or eroded away by high erosion. In Australia, we can see earthquakes, evidence of earthquakes happening tens and I believe hundreds of thousands of years ago in the landscape, because we have such a low erosion rate. We've got such a low population. But here it's much more difficult because the slip rates are actually quite low. You know, for the inland earth faults, they tend to be fairly low. And you have so much erosion and cultural activity. So it's a really hard work for the geologist, and takes a long time. And so the thing you have to do is start now and keep going, even when you don't find evidence of earthquakes, because that's, you know, you'll get money from the government to dig your trench, and you won't find anything, and the government will say, we don't want to spend any more money. But you just have to keep going. It can be very discouraging, but it has to be done, and it has to be continued. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
But I did want to mention though, in the absence of that, what we can do is look at the historical record, because Cianjur itself had experienced a large earthquake in, I think it was 1897, which is fairly well documented. So whatever fault caused it, we know that an earthquake happened there before, and we can rely on that for at least, you know, that's what we can do for now, at least, until we have better knowledge from the geology.
Thank you very much, Phil, for the answer. Yeah. There's a question from the participant online.
Okay.
So who wants to read the question? I think it's good. Yeah, Koki, it's okay. Is it in Bahasa?
The first one? How
Yeah,
to prevent earthquakes from occurring in Indonesia? You can't do that. That's the only thing you can do is reduce the impact of the earthquakes through better planning and hopefully not settling large populations near active faults. But oftentimes that you already have that, and so you then have to rely on better construction. So better planning, better construction. are the ways that we can reduce earthquake fatalities. That's the proven way that's been done throughout the world. There is work being done on things like earthquake early warning and also earthquake prediction, but those are unproven. I would say they're as yet unproven. And really the thing you need to do is build better buildings. And it doesn't have to be that expensive. I think when you're starting, to some extent, when you're starting from a fairly low base, you can really get some improvements, even with relatively low cost measures like better concrete, slightly better concrete and better reinforcement. Okay, next question. It's in Indonesian.
No, I think it's just the operator just asked the audience to ask question. Another one. Okay, yeah, just now. That's the other one.
Can we predict the next earthquake based on the history? Well, you not necessarily can you predict the next earthquake based on the history, because earthquakes can have very long recurrence periods, and they can be longer than even the historical record. They can certainly be longer than the 100 years that we've been recording earthquakes, and they can be even longer than the 200 or 300 years in the historical record. So you can have earthquakes happening in places where there's no recorded earthquake and no historical experience of an earthquake. So you can't rely just on the historical record. But if you know that a historical earthquake happened, you know it will happen again. It may not be able to predict exactly when or how big it will be, but if there's been a historical earthquake in this place, it will happen again, because faults always produce, if a fault is producing earthquakes, it will continue to do so. So that strain energy will build up again, and there will be another earthquake. It might be difficult to say when and just how big it will be, but you can estimate the size. And if you have a long enough historical record, you might be able to estimate the recurrence rate. So historical data doesn't give you everything, but it's better than nothing. Okay, any other questions? There's one. Okay. What do you think about the HARP technology to change the weather? I don't know anything about HARP technology or changing the weather, so I think.
So yeah,
I don't know about that. I'm sorry.
Okay, the next question is
there another?
Done? Okay,
that's the last one.
Just look. Okay, so we still have a couple of minutes, 6 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 questions for the last question. Okay, yeah, please.
Good afternoon for everyone, and good afternoon, Professor Bill Cummins from the Australian University. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Adita Novella, but you can call me Adita for short, my name. About my question about after of what you explained, I would like to ask about some of the liquefaction that maybe the example of the best case is from the Palu Donggala. So about the liquefaction, we have known that from the earthquake, but from that earthquake there was some maybe I would call the dominus effect, like the liquefaction after the earthquake. Not only from the earthquake, but from the very high density of the rain or the clay soils, because the clays of rain is actually kind of unstable soils. But my question is the weight of the fault and the weight of the fault from the earthquake from that area that has high from, maybe I would call a high liquefaction area. Is the weight of the fault earthquake affect the liquefaction of that area? So that's my question. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry, you said the weight of the what of the earthquake?
The weight of the fault.
Oh, the width of
the weight.
Well, certainly the proximity to the fault, how close you are to the fault, is very important in determining the intensity of the ground motion. And so if the fault is wider, then it can accommodate larger earthquakes, and also more places will be very close to that fault.
So yeah, that's what I mean. So another that what I mean is how it's affect from the liquefaction. Is it the liquefaction become even more active, even if the soil has the stable a stable?
I don't know. I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, you need, I mean, a condition for liquefaction is that it's granular, sort of fine-grained soil that is water saturated. So I'm not aware, but I don't really know. I'm not a soil scientist. That so could really large earthquakes even cause stable soils to liquefy? I from what they tell me, from what I read, the answer is no. But they can fail in other ways too, though. They can experience nonlinear failure that may not be liquefaction, but it will can be catastrophic. So they can deform a lot and cause a lot of ground movement, even if it's not flowing like a liquid. It's enough ground movement that it could, destroy buildings. But I don't. Yeah, that's sort of. I really know that much about liquefaction that I can answer that. Yeah.
It's a good idea for research.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. Maybe some another small question. So. About the liquefaction, so maybe the clay is it's kind of unstable or stable soils. Which ones of this that seems correct?
Well, my understanding is clay will not liquefy, but whether it's going to, whether it's so stable. I mean, there's a lot of. Clay is a very funny material. Certainly, it will. It can promote landslides because it can be an impermeable barrier, and so it can lead. That can promote sliding of material above a clay layer, and that happened in Padang in 2009. There was a major earthquake, major landslide triggered by an earthquake, and it was due to this volcanic pumice on top of a clay layer that just slid right off and buried several villages. So to that extent, clay is a bad thing. And I don't know, I'm not a soil scientist, so I don't really know that much about how clay behaves though during strong ground motion.
So maybe the effect is probably because of the plasticity index, or maybe the cohesion of its.
I'm sorry?
So maybe the effects could be from the effects of the plasticity index, or maybe some kind of cohesion it has.
They might. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about soil.
You have to do it first. Do the research.
Okay. So maybe that's all from my question, Mr. Professor Pils. Thank you so much for your time from me. So okay. Thank you for everyone for the attention. Good afternoon for you.
Thank you very much. Very interesting question. So you got yourself your topic for the.
There's another question
pieces.
from the.
Okay. It's okay. It's we have like 1 minute left. Last question. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so besides urban areas, Indonesia also has a lot of manufacture, mining, and other extractive industries that are located in earthquake-prone areas. Some of the waste is very harmful. Do we need to have specific requirements for its construction and building placement planning to reduce effects on the environment? Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, mine tailing dams in particular can fail in earthquakes and can cause regulations. In the case of dams, there are there's an international association of dam owners that, but yeah, you need special standards for those. The infrastructure that, there's a very impressive infrastructure being built in Indonesia. And I think that in some cases at least, that has not always considered the potential for earthquakes to damage that infrastructure. But yeah, any kind of storage facility of hazardous material would require special, should be looked at by an engineer, and the engineer should consider the seismic hazard in the area. And that seismic hazard really should be carefully done and include a geological survey for active faults in the immediate area. Now, I will mention that I sort of brushed aside earthquake early warning, but that is one area where earthquake early warning can potentially help to stop, you know, you only get an early warning for some tens of seconds before the strong shaking arise, but that can sometimes be enough to secure hazardous material or stop some kind of operation involving hazardous material. So sometimes those kind of operations involving that material can benefit from earthquake early warning. But in general, yeah, any kind of construction related to it should very carefully consider the seismic hazard, I think, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Phil Cummins, for the talk and the quick Q&A session. It's very, it's an honor to learn from you, Professor Phil Cummins, and from this 1 hour session, we can see that we have to live with the faults, I mean the geological faults, and this is the facts. And some people just, oh, geologists, geophysicists, they just carrying people with many of these line faults, but that's not the point. What we want to give them the information is this is some potential of hazard, and we have to live with it, and we have to prepare for it. I think that's the point, that hazard is not just the phenomena, but also what is the exposure that, like Professor Phil Cummins said before, the buildings, the population, the human activities. So we have to prepare for it, for the better future for us. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much, Professor Cummins, and to Koki.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramadan and Professor Phil, for the good insight about the risk of earthquake, especially in those urban areas and megacities. Okay, for the next session, before closing, we will have Mr. Suherman to give some present for Professor Phil. And then next, for the last session, we will have together, we take a picture with Mr. Phil. Please get up from your seat and di sini mungkin apa banner gimana tuh? Kita pakai banner.
Okay, sure.
Dear Zoom operator, would you like to turn on to invite all the participants in this Zoom meeting to join the photo session as well, if so? Can the operator hear my voice? Hello.
Yes, I hear.
Dear operator, can you let everyone in the Zoom meeting to join the photo session, if so? Does everyone notice about my points, instruction, please?
Untuk yang ada di sini.
Biar Bapak Ibu boleh dibantu untuk turn on kamera untuk di capture dahulu oleh operator. Udah banyak yang live ya. Berapa sudah saya capture? Terima kasih. Mungkin nanti bisa ditutup sama operator ya.
Iya, lagi pada seru kayaknya di sana, Budit.
Pak Truman, terima kasih dari BRIN. Sepertinya udah ikut hadir ya, Pak.
Terima kasih, Pak.
Sip.
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu yang ada di Zoom meeting juga.
Sampai ketemu lagi semuanya.
Terima kasih.
Ruman.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Saya juga izin live ya Bapak Ibu.
Ya.